Hello, and welcome to Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Doors, diverse text for the ELA bookshelf. My name is Sandra Hogue, and I am ELA instructional lead for our AIS schools and JCPS. My Twitter handle is at Sandra L. Hogue. So if at any time you'd like to tag me for ELA AIS work, please feel free to do so. Thank you for joining me today. Here's a look at our session's journey. First, we're going to take time to gain understanding about why I choose this idea of mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. Next, we'll look at resources to know better so that we do better. We all know that we're in a space and time in this city and in this nation where lots of traditional practices are being called to question. Education is not excluded from that conversation, so we'll look at resources that will help us move closer to our best selves as educators. Then we'll look at a few texts that are worthy of a K1 bookshelf. We'll look at a few worthy of a 2-3 bookshelf and a 4-5 bookshelf. First, we're going to look at this idea, as I mentioned, of mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. This concept is from the work of Dr. Rudine Sims, Bishop, and in 1990 she recorded an essay where she described the needs of students in the classroom regarding literature. I can't do any better justice to her work than she can. So this very short clip will explain to us this notion of mirrors, windows, and sliding doors in education regarding literature.
We need diverse books because we need books in which children can find themselves, see reflections of themselves. I wrote a piece, maybe 1990 it was published, which I called Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Glass Doors. And I think that's really why we children need to see themselves reflected, but books can also be windows, and so you can look through and see other worlds and see how they match up or don't match up to your own. But the sliding glass door allows you to enter that world as well, and so that's the reason that the diversity needs to go both ways. I mean, it's not just children who have been underrepresented and marginalized who need these books. It's also the children who always find their mirrors in the books and therefore get an exaggerated sense of their own self-worth and a false sense of what the world is like, because it's becoming more and more colorful and diverse as time goes on. So I think that's why.
And we will close that window so that it doesn't continue to speak for us. But in her work, Dr. Sims Bishop is speaking regarding mirrors in the text in our classroom. So as educators, we have to be intentional about ensuring that in the literature reflected on our book, present on our bookshelves, students see their lives, they see their existence, and they see characters that they can relate to, characters that have had similar experiences to those that they have had. And so there's also this notion of windows that allow students to see the lives of others, to see how their lives differ than the lives of people around them. And so those windows become important as well. And then the notion of sliding glass doors reminds us that students have the ability to move freely, right? They don't have to remain in that mirrored position. They have the opportunity through text to experience other worlds that are unlike theirs and imagine possibilities beyond their current realities. Here is yet another resource for those of us who want to know more about mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. This is from Charleston County Public Library, and in it, this writer is reflecting on their growth, their progress in understanding the importance of diversifying their bookshelves. It's a really short piece. I'm a fan of pieces like these blog posts that will allow us to get in, get out, and gain nuggets of knowledge. And so that will just provide you additional information on the concept. Also, this idea of, and I think one of the reasons this idea of mirrors, windows, and sliding doors resonates so much with me is that I set out on a journey from undergrad where I was challenged in one of my children's literature courses by Dr. Leah Smith to develop a diverse unit of study that looked at fairy tales. And so in that course, I developed a unit of study that looked at international versions of Cinderella. And so there were books like Ye Shin, there was Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters, there was The Rough-Faced Girl, and a traditional Cinderella tale. And in that, I was encouraged through that process. I learned a great deal about how important it is for students to see characters that look like them. As an African American who grew up in the West End of the city of Louisville, but started school at the beginning of busing, I found myself in schools that weren't in my neighborhood, and certainly on those bookshelves, I didn't see lives that reflected my own. And so that unit that I developed on Cinderella helped me to understand the importance of that piece. But as I started teaching, I transformed my thinking, because what I came to know is that just because the skin color happens to be the same, it doesn't mean that students can identify with the journey of the characters. And so that's not as popular, I think, as the idea of multicultural text. But in reality, what I found in the classroom was that it was important that my students could connect with the experiences of the characters. They also do need to see characters that reflect their diversity, their culture, but in a deeper sense, they need to see characters who have faced similar joys, similar challenges, similar family structures as they have, so that they can identify with those students. And so I developed what was called close to home text. And in these texts, students can do just that. They can identify with the characters and sometimes find a safe space to discuss some of the traumas they have experienced, right? It's not specific to traumas, specific to the need to be resilient, but it's also similar to any emotion, right? Joy, pain, sorrow, happiness, surprise, any emotion. And in that, I found that students are able to recognize that emotions are human-based and not exclusive to any one culture. And so in this collection, I have gathered books that you may find helpful. It's not all inclusive. It's not a perfect list. I change it. I've been working on this list at least for a dozen years, and it continues to grow and change as I discover new books and as I learn more about the role of literature in the classroom. So you have access to this, and I hope that you will find in it text that may find a place on your bookshelves. Going back to this notion of thinking about mirrors, windows, and sliding doors, some of us we are all in different places on our journeys. I have been really candid with those closest to me about how traumatic the events of this spring and summer have been for me as an African American woman who is raising two African American children, one male and one female. And so, um, but what I have found inspirational is the conversations, the candid conversations, the willingness and openness of those in our community to have dialogue that's uncomfortable dialogue, quite frankly, regarding where we are as a nation. And so we all should be, if you think about the book Stamped, and the author's name escapes me, but if you think about in that book, he talks about um, those who are anti-racist, who are just out front and challenge racism every time it presents itself, right? So that's a critical place for us to all explore, and not everyone's in a space where they feel comfortable challenging racism. Um, I have friends who are losing family members, who are losing friends over their stance to be anti-bias, to be anti-racist. And so, and then we have some who continue to argue that it's not a real thing, that it doesn't exist in our society, that we've moved past it, right? And so, in this notion of anti racism, we can take time and space as educators to grow from wherever we're standing right now. I hope, and it is my hope, that none of us are in a position where we deny that it exists, especially in our urban community and working with our urban population. But I hope that wherever you are on your journey, you are committed to growing and to becoming a voice. I continue to say that silence is an endorsement. And so let's just be mindful that we don't want to stand idly by. We don't want to actively participate in racism. We certainly don't want to be aggressors or perpetuators of racism, nor do we want to be those silent voices who allow it to exist in our space without voicing um, and educating, voicing our stance and educating those around us about the need to learn and grow. So on this page, there are several resources that you may find helpful. And trust me, I'm going to get to the text, and I know some of you are here for the text, and but I'm a firm believer that I can give you a few fish, which I will in this collection, in this session, but I also want to teach you to fish, right? So my job is to educate so that you don't really need me telling you about the latest, greatest book, but that you are journeying on your own, wherever you are in the journey, moving toward a more anti-racist position. So here's a resource, a guide for selecting anti-bias children's books. This social justice website is amazing. Social justice books. It is a teacher's dream. It is this African American educator's dream. It is full of amazing resources that will help us all know better, once again, so that we can do better. In this particular piece, it is a guide for selecting anti-bias children's books. And so in this entry, it reminds us or it teaches us how to look for stereotypes. What we don't want are texts that continue to perpetuate stereotypes that all African Americans in the inner city are poor, criminal, incarcerated, all of the woes of society, right? So we don't want that kind of thing perpetuated. We don't want gender stereotypes perpetuated. We don't want those who are able or disabled to be characterized in a stereotypical way in the text that we use. So we want to be critical consumers of the resources that we have at hand. And so this encourages us in this chart to think about common harmful or undermining stereotypes, keep these in mind because they can do damage to our student populations, right? So we want to just be, I mean, just if you skim that list, there are many things that pop out, and I know that we have encountered literature, movies, music, even our own opinions that that embrace these harmful stereotypes. And so it's once again about moving from where we are on this journey to a better place, and more anti-biased, anti-racist stance. And so it also encourages us in this entry to look at tokenism, and that's the notion that, you know, if you have a text, there's a lone minority represented in that text, and that one represented minority speaks for the entire culture in that piece. So we just want to be mindful of texts that that perpetuate tokenism. Um, we want to look for invisibility, meaning there are certain folks who are just simply excluded, certain populations that are simply excluded from our collections, from the text that we're using most in our classroom. And so here, once again, are some of those groups that remain invisible largely in children's books and in mainstream media. So we want to be aware of those deficits and ensure that we make these invisible populations visible, because once again, my goal is to ensure that my students see themselves, see a mirror in the text that I'm using in my classroom. And we want to check the storyline. We want to look for messages about different lifestyles. We want to consider the effects on students' self and their identities. It's just, this blog post just encourages us once again to be more critical consumers of the text that we place before students, more than we ever have before. We just have to be more intentional, myself included. Like we just have to be more intentional about that piece. This entry blog post and most everything in this slide deck is a link to something, because I want, once again, to teach you to fish, not to just hand you all of these amazing books that I think will be game changers for your students, right? So in this piece, the writer talks about the use of the term Black is beautiful. She went on a journey with her 27 first graders where she revisited a text from the 1970s called Black is Beautiful. And in that text, she invited students to explore the beauty in the color Black. And she took that journey forward into some other text and more modern pieces. And the book, I tried, once I saw this blog post, to purchase the book Black is Beautiful from the 70s, and it's selling for over $1,000, I think, because it's out of print. But I did find a video for it on YouTube that you may want to explore that involves children reading it. This resource, Teaching Young Children About Race, will allow us to dig deeper. It's a lengthier, it's part of Antibias Education, this text here, and it is a lengthier blog post, but really gets into some detail into what we can do to ensure that we're being equitable. So here are some strategies for learning about physical differences and similarities. We can explore skin color, hair color, eyes. We can focus on children's confusions about skin color. We can expand awareness of racial similarities and differences. And what I want to encourage you to do is not say, oh, Sandra shared this in her presentation, it must be 100% gospel. In fact, the opposite is true. I want you, as educated educators with multiple college degrees, to be critical consumers of the resources I'm sharing with you. All of them have nuggets of things that I think will help make us better educators, but at the same time, once again, be a critical consumer of the information so that you fold it in meaningful ways that make us all better. And then Black history is American history. And that just reminds me of the notion of those who question whether we in fact need to still have a Black History Month. That question was posed in a group recently, just in 2020 conversation that I was part of. And it was argued that it encourages exclusionary thinking, right? This notion that we need to have Black history over here isolated when in fact it should be infused everywhere. Now, I completely agree that Black history, as it says on that previous slide, Black history is American history. You will not get an argument out of me from that, because if you pull out African American history, Black history from American history, then you don't have America as we know and love. We don't have it as, one of the top nations in the world. And so the footprint of African Americans in this country's history cannot be ignored. And my argument regarding the need for a Black History Month is the fact that, once again, we're all in different places on this journey. There are some who believe that covering Dr. King, Harriet Tubman, slavery is enough. And in February, we can check that box, and then we can tuck away African American history not to be spoken of again. Now, what I'm noticing is that we've made strides. Black history has expanded, certainly, and we have these lists of African American inventors and celebrities and stars and athletes who have made change in the African American landscape. And so we're expanding beyond Harriet Tubman and Dr. King. However, that idea of only focusing on these rock star people really does sell Black history short, right? So we want to move even further. And I argue that until we're in a position where Black history is woven into the fabric of everything we teach in our schools, because it cannot be teased out, as I argued before, then the need for Black History Month is still there in my eyes. I still want us to, for those who ignore it all the time, but feel forced to engage in the conversation, if only for the month of February, if that's where they are on their journey. There's shame in that, in my opinion. That shouldn't be where any of us are as urban educators, but I happen to know personally that there are some who are still in that space, and they are forced to pause for the month of February to honor the accomplishments of African Americans. But ultimately, yes, when African American history is perceived as American history and woven into all of our practices, then maybe at that point we can set aside this notion of Black History Month in February. So having said that, this collection, once again, social justice books, they've done a lot of this legwork for us. Once again, they've done a lot of the fishing for us. And so here you'll find a collection of early elementary texts that you may choose to use to teach Black history, and then it moves up through the age groups. And so you won't go wrong with any of these books. Once again, it will help you to have a robust collection of text regarding Black history, as opposed to those limited texts that we've been using and learning about for decades. They're the same folks I learned about when I was in elementary school in the 70s. And so I'm a firm believer that when we know better, we should do better. And so this social justice books website helps us to, once again, wherever we are on that journey, we can find a way to move even further, to be even better and stronger educators for our students. So those are some resources. Once again, I know the title said diverse books for your bookshelf, but once again, I am an educator and I'm a teacher coach, and I see it as a huge part of my job to teach you to fish, not just to hand you a bunch of text that I am giddy about. Trust me, giddy. You're going to hear me get really excited about these books because they are phenomenal, but they are only, gosh, a microscopic drop in the bucket. There are so many amazing texts out there. So I felt the need to front load and to help us think about how we may, as educators, fish for ourselves. This document, and this is a link too. Once again, if you have the slide deck, most everything in this slide deck is a link to the resource. I love this notion of comparison between asset and deficit. based approaches, because one of the things, once again, we want to think about with mirrors, windows, and sliding doors, as we saw on the other screen, we don't want to perpetuate stereotypes. We don't want a deficit mindset that says, woe is me, these poor downtrodden African American students from our urban community. I often describe it this way. Sometimes we feel like from our perches in middle class and sometimes upper class America that we need to unscrew their little heads and, detach the wires where they're from and then pull them into our perception of our better lives, right? We want to make them more like us. The reality is that's deficit mindset, and that it completely ignores the beauty in their lives. It's important to know that they have beauty in their lives. I'm reminded of the research of Moll, Moll, who talks about funds of knowledge, and the fact that if we are serving an urban community, any community really, we need to be aware that they bring gifts, they bring wonderful backgrounds, they bring knowledge and energy and all of these funds that are to be celebrated, not to be squelched, so that they look and sound and act more like us. And so this resource will just reminds us of that. Once again, that was Moll's work, Moll, Funds of Knowledge, but these are other researchers, and it looks at asset and deficit-based approaches, right? So in this document that's part of a module from this university, it looks at this notion of assets, looking at things as assets versus deficits. So we want to be strength-driven as opposed to needs-driven. We want to look at our students and say, what are the gifts they bring? One of the things I know about our students is that their voices, those students who will toss a classroom in a heartbeat, will insist that you hear them. And so if we stand in that position where we're just trying to disconnect who they are and make them more like us, they will rise up, they will resist, and they will make our lives miserable in ways that will have us, seeking medical attention from our doctors for our nerves, right? I used to say, I never wanted my students to recognize the fact that they had me outnumbered 24-1 when I was teaching primary, or 28 or 29-1 when I was teaching intermediate, because once they recognized that, then I would lose my ability to encourage them to do the right thing, right? And so if you are, in fact, that educator who tries to squeeze out of students their identity, their voices, and you look at that energy they bring as a deficit, as opposed to looking at how you might channel this energy into a strength, how you might merge this energy with the content you must teach for the better of the students, then you're living in that needs-driven space, the need to make them more like you. And once again, like I said, today's students will absolutely resist, and they'll make your lives miserable. So we want to be mindful of our approach, our perception of students. And this is a huge area of growth for us. I think as a district and as a nation, we need to be aware as educators that it's not our job to make them more like us. It's our job to tap into the gifts they bring and leverage those so that we help them along this journey of education as an educational institution. And so in this piece, once again, you click and you'll go right to the website, and it will carry you through a series of exercises that will help you to think about your stance and how you approach the gifts of I'm calling them gifts, the funds of knowledge, the gifts that students bring to the classroom so that we can leverage them for the good. Next, just a nugget right here in the middle. A curriculum can only be as anti-racist as the person delivering it. In other words, every resource that I just shared with you and every book I'm going to share with you from here forward is only as good as your delivery of that material, right? So you can take a perfectly well-intended text, you can take a perfectly well-intended resource and mishandle it to the point that it becomes, in fact, the opposite of what you were aiming for. An example of that was when I was teaching Jim Crow laws to my students when I was teaching. I think it was first and second grade at the time. And we were talking about Jim Crow laws and whites only signs. And we were looking at photo artifacts, and we were reading literature, and we were learning about the context of our history in the time. And time ran short because we were really engrossed in the learning, having incredible dialogue. The students and I were fully engaged in the work, and I soon realized we were late for special area. And so I had them to boogie. I used to say things like, "Boogie, I need you to get in line right away. I need you to hustle because we're late. And let's head on down to," I don't know where we were headed. But one of my students, who, based on that lesson, because I didn't handle it with care, pushed through I didn't, and I don't mean I didn't handle it with care, I did, but I didn't leave time to close out the lesson in a way that was healthy. My student pushed through the line and said, "Get out of the way, whites only." Well, that failure was not Zachary's fault. It was my fault, right? Because I hadn't handled the material. I hadn't delivered the material in the way it needed to be delivered. And so it's my responsibility to ensure that as I handle the material, I handle it in a way that ensures that the outcomes I've identified are exactly where we land, and that students are okay at the end of that. Now, I had a meeting with Zachary out in the hallway immediately, and had a class meeting when we came back into the room, so that we had this closure that really should have happened. But really, I was not angry with Zachary. The failure in that context was mine, not his. And so, just a word to the wise: a curriculum can only be as anti-racist, or can only be as effective. I know that example really wasn't an anti-racist example, but it was an example of how mishandling a well-intended lesson can lead to consequences that you certainly didn't seek, right? And so we have to be in a space where we're able to step into those spaces that feel a little uncomfortable for us, and we have to be in a position where we are considering ourselves action researchers, so that we can bend and adjust and modify as needed, so that we do end up in a place where we're better educators for our students. In other words, I don't want you saying, "No, I'm not approaching that racism topic because I'm not sure I can handle it." You absolutely need to dip your toes in it, because, once again, if you don't, in the temperature of our city and our nation right now, students are going to bring it to you whether you're ready or not. So having a plan for how to be okay with, in that space, making sure students are okay, making sure you have a structure for uncomfortable conversations, all of that needs to be part of your thinking out front as the educator, so that you don't make a mistake like I did that day. And when you do make those mistakes, being comfortable with adjusting and learning from it, right? So that you don't make the same mistakes twice. But what I don't want you to do, once again, is to just say, "I'm not even opening that door because I know I can't handle it." Yes, you can. And it is not only do I believe that you can, I believe that you must. It's critical. We cannot shy away from and try to stay in that safe zone, because our country, our city, our state is not in a safe zone space right now. And so, in fact, we're in a forward momentum space where we can make the world, in fact, a better place. And I'm calling upon you to do that. So even if you approach it as from an action research stance, that's okay, because that means I'm asking the questions. I don't know all the answers going in, but I'm going to develop a plan for how to find answers to those questions. Now to the books. I know it's been long enough. And I thank you for your patience. But once again, I'm a teacher coach. And so I have to have that part. I can't just come give you candy and say, "Here you go, buy these 3 books and your life will be better." It's bigger than that, right? So these books are just a ping in the ocean, right? One droplet in the ocean of possibilities. But these are some new books, some of which have not yet been released, and others that have been released either last year or this year, that I think deserve a spot on your educator bookshelf. The first one is "I Am Every Good Thing." I have this one here first because I had the privilege of meeting Gordon C. James, the illustrator of this text, who also illustrated the book Crown. That was an award-winning book that is about the African American hair right, with the young boy on the cover. He is the illustrator of this book as well. It's being released later this fall. I've already ordered my copy and pre-ordered my copy from Amazon. If you go to Amazon, you'll be able to see sample pages from the book, and it is beautiful. It's a text that honors, once again, the funds of knowledge, who they are, the energy they bring as little people into our space, the insecurities they bring. It honors them as people. I am every good thing. Now, the illustrator is speaking to African, and the text primarily speaks to the African American. So it's a cultural text. But once again, I believe that students will be able to find mirrors in this text, whether they are African American or not. They will be able to see, I have those common emotions. I've had those feelings before. I have felt that way. I have had those thoughts. It also, if they're not African American, provides a window for them into the lives of this culture unlike their own. And once again, that idea of sliding doors, well, gee, I've never done that, but I could, right? So that's that great text, and I hope that you'll have a look at it. The language is amazing. The illustrations are yummy. And so have a look, because I think it's worthy of a spot on your bookshelf. I Can Write the World. The writing project teacher in me was all giddy when I came across this text. It's the story of an 8-year-old girl who is perplexed, that's a great word for it, by how her community is represented in the media, in the news, and by those who don't live directly in her neighborhood. And so her mother challenges her to be the author of their stories, to be the one be the one who tells the stories of her community. And so she's on a mission to describe the image of her community that she thinks everyone should know about. And so this is another one, once again, worthy of space on your bookshelf. It would not only encourage students to be writers, it also provides a space for them to think about, once again, not from the deficit lens, but from the asset lens. If we only listen to the perception of the media of the West End, then we don't understand that there are many amazing funds, amazing assets within the community that could be tapped into and leveraged for the good of our students. And this piece would open that conversation. It would encourage kids to open their eyes to that asset-based approach to their communities, which many of them already are aware of, but it's an opportunity for them to write and connect with that and to share their perceptions of their space with the world. This next one, I think, is also a gem. It's Your Name is a Song. My goodness, how much better does it get than that? There's been lots of conversation recently about the impact of mispronouncing students' names. And so this book is a celebration of a young girl who goes to school and she just ends up humiliated and embarrassed because everyone continues to mispronounce her name. And her mother sets out on a journey of helping her to understand the beauty and the power in her name, and that it is not something to be ashamed of. Instead, it is something to be valued and celebrated. And so those are books. I have them in the K-1 bookshelf. Would they work in upper grades? Absolutely. Once again, it's all in how you handle that text in your classroom. What are your intentions behind it? Any of these texts could be used to teach the standards, and I'm intentionally not mentioning the standards in this session because I want you to think about making those connections for yourself. In other words, I don't want you to see I Am Every Good Thing as the book I use to teach character traits. I don't want you to see it as only the book that could only be used in that way. It has many possibilities. And so comb through your standards, your success criteria as you build your mini units, and think about how might these texts and others like them become, once again, part of the fabric of what I'm doing, not just something I preserve for African American History Month or Black History Month. Second and third grade, once again, these have range. I just happened to place them here because that felt like a good place to start, but they can either move up or down according to my intention as the teacher. Happy right now is just a celebration of joy and emotions and self-care. It speaks to how important it is to recognize where we are in space and time and to honor that, and strategies for ensuring we're okay. So it is as joyous and happy as the cover of the book. I think you'll love it. And her little afro puffs and the fact that she's wearing a yellow dress, which is my favorite color, just makes it all the sweeter. So this is one that I found just this past weekend and see lots of potential for it. Going Down Home with Daddy is a story of culture and history and family and the richness of the African American extended family. They're going on a journey to visit parents and great grandparents and aunts and uncles, and they are going for a celebration. This is a Caldecott honor book, and it can be used in a variety of ways to, once again, provide mirrors, because kids will be able to identify with the family structures. They'll be able to identify with the culture, some of your students. Others will see it as a window into, oh, this family is quite different than mine, and I can learn from this culture by being engaged in this text. And then once again, sliding doors. My family doesn't do that, but maybe that's something we might do someday. Or maybe that's something that when I have my own family, when I'm a parent, that I'd like to remember, because I think it would be a happy thing to make part of my life. And so once again, mirrors, windows, and sliding doors are relevant here as well. This last one is an absolute I just love it. I love all of them. You guys know me. I love books. So if you ask me any given day, it changes. But I love this book. It's a dictionary for a better world. I am a fan of encouraging kids to use their voices as advocates to make the world a better place. And so this is just that kind of book. And so it has poems and quotes, once again, and anecdotes from A to Z. And so it has amazing ideas like perseverance, achievement, etc. And with each of those poems or anecdotes, it also has a call to act. It invites kiddos in to try something, to do something that would make the world a better place. And for me, you put poetry and great quotes and anecdotes together with the idea of encouraging kids to use their voices to make the world a better place, and there's not a better book to be composed, in my opinion. So I encourage you to have a look at that one. And on the 4th and 5th grade bookshelf, I love all of these. I mean, I didn't put anything on here that I don't love, and so just know that I'll say, oh my goodness, it's the best thing since sliced bread, but I mean that for all of them, right? Say Her Name is a book I just received in the mail the night before this session. So I just received it from Amazon. I ordered it based on sample pages. I have it in my possession now, and if you could see me on camera, you would see that I have loaded this small book. It's tiny in size. Loaded this small book, Say Her Name, with so many sticky notes because I was all up in the amen corner. Now, what does that mean? It means that as I read those pieces, they hit me at the core. They hit me right at the heart. And they resonated with me in such a way that I was so excited that I can't wait to share them with others. And I'd venture to say I have at least 20 sticky notes on pages I've identified, and there probably would have been easier to identify the pieces that didn't resonate with me. She uses a combination, Zeta Elliott uses a combination of her own poems and poems from those in the past, like Lucille Clifton and, poets who have come before her. The names are escaping me right now. I need to grab the book. But she uses poets who inspired her and her own poems to speak to this notion of, say her name, advocacy, Black Lives Matter. There are pieces, let me tell you, that I would not use in elementary in this book. Let me say that again. There are pieces in this book that I would not use in an elementary classroom, but most of them are absolutely appropriate for 4th and 5th grade, to the point that it's worth the purchase. It is absolutely worth the purchase. And so I encourage you to have a look at that book, because I felt inspired, I felt empowered. And once again, I know your students will find mirrors, windows, and sliding doors in that text. The next is a chapter book, just a simple book, Ways to Make Sunshine. In this book, this character is not exceptional in any way. She is a typical kiddo. She gets in trouble. Sometimes she's a little mean to her brother. Sometimes she talks back to her parents, not in a horrible, completely disrespectful way, just a normal kid. And so I argue that our kiddos need to see that mirror of, here's a kid who's just kind of normal like me. He's not changing the world at every turn, is not, exceptional in any way, a superstar singer or bike rider or anything, just a normal kid like me facing normal kid challenges. And so I think that's what this book provides. And it's yummy. It's yummy. It's just a cute, happy little book that I think your fourth graders especially might enjoy. The next one is Box, and if you know anything about Henry Box Brown, Henry and the Freedom Box is one that I have that's a picture book that I've used in the past. This one is a new spin on the story of Henry Box Brown, who, if you don't know the story, was a slave in the South and actually had himself mailed with the help of others, right? Mailed in a box from the South up north to his freedom, literally in a box. And in this piece, the reason I have it with fourth and fifth, and the other Henry Box Brown story I would consider more 2-3. This one feels more 4-5 to me because it is the story of Henry Box Brown told in poems. And each poem that moves along in the story is written in 6 lines. And that's done with intention by the author because a box has 6 sides. And so in these short pieces that that tell the story in a timeline of Henry Box Brown's journey, it's an excellent study in poetry. It's an excellent study in history. It's an excellent study in the realism of the time period, and in a poetic way, in an artistic way that's unique, and certain pages in it just gave me chills. So I think it is a good book to have on your bookshelf. The next one, She Spoke. This one is another one I acquired recently, but it's the story, once again, of women in this case, who use their voices to impact the world. These 14 women who raised their voices and changed the world. So once again, these are the folks that gained celebrity for, standing up and speaking out, which is something we want to encourage in our students. And in this particular book, it also has on the side the actual voices, those buttons on the side, which usually you would think of for toddler books, where it sings the songs or gives the shape, or says the letter or spells the word. But in this case, it uses the actual voices of these 14 women so that students can hear them speaking some of their own words. In some cases, I'm sure they're recreations, but it's a neat notion of, once I learn about what this person has done to make the world a better place, I actually get to hear the sound of their voice, or a voice articulating their argument and their power and their strength, speaking to the world. So those are books. Once again, I gave you some fish. It's not all inclusive. This is one drop in an ocean of possibilities. But these are some more recent texts that I think would add value to your classroom bookshelf if you're thinking about mirrors, windows, and sliding doors, and ensuring diverse text on your teacher bookshelf. I can see them being part of classroom libraries where students are able to shop and self-select and add to their own collection books they'd like to read more about. I can also see them being whole group for, I'm a teacher and I have this mini unit I've constructed and I have success criteria in mind, and this book will help us move further toward that success criteria for these standards. They can be used in that way and many ways in between, right? So you can look at them for crafting studies. You can look at them from a social studies lens. You can look at them from a personal, social, emotional lens. There are many possibilities, once again, which is why I didn't point you to a specific standard, because I feel like that would box you into thinking that's the only way these texts can be used. Instead, I want you to lean into your practice, lean into your goals, lean into your decision making as an educator, so that you use these books in ways that are appropriate for students. Now, once again, this was this session's journey. We looked at mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. Just as a recap, we looked at resources to know better so that we do better. Once again, wherever you are in this journey, I'm reserving judgment for where people are on their journey. I'm not passing judgment in any way. What I am saying is we have to do better. So no matter where you are on this journey of ensuring anti-racist, anti-bias practices in your classroom, then we are in a position where we must move forward. And so that was the goal of this session. I then shared with you some worthy text for the K1 bookshelf, some worthy text for the 2-3, and worthy text for the 4-5 bookshelf. Once again, please don't box them into saying, oh, those were on the K1 list, I shouldn't order those. Go look at the sample pages on Amazon, check them out from the library, find a way to get to know the text. And even if you teach another grade, if once again, you have a goal in mind, you have success criteria in mind, and you think those books can help, by all means, use them accordingly. The resources, add them to your toolbox. Be on a mission. Once again, I'm going back up. I'm sorry, I went to the bullet back up above to speak to the resources, but use those resources to improve your practice. Be better today than you were on yesterday. If you do that, then mission accomplished. And I feel like I've not wasted your time here today. On a personal and on our personal and educator journeys, we need to continue to remember this. Okay, so we have to continue on our journeys. No matter how open-minded, socially conscious, anti-racist I think I am, I still have old, learned, hidden biases that I need to examine. It is my responsibility to check myself daily for my stereotypes, my prejudices, and ultimately discrimination, right? So the journey is personal. Wherever you are, you have to be intentional about moving forward and being better today than you were on yesterday. And so when I look at this quote, even though there's a bunny, I don't know why there's a bunny, I guess to avoid assigning a certain culture or gender or to this notion, but we have to continually be on this journey. And we can't say, look, I'm anti-racist, I have arrived, and I don't need to do any additional work. It is daily. It is constant. And we have to constantly be on a mission to be better and to do better. Thank you for joining me today. It's difficult for me to record. I like to interact with people, so I hope you'll bear with this recording and accept it as my best in this space and time. But I want to remind you, in addition to thanking you for joining me, remind you that there's an AIS Week Google form that we're asking you to speak to, a 2-part reflection. The first being naming the session, day and time that you attended, title of the session, presenter of the session, and the other part being a reflection on what did you learn new. Hopefully you gained something new from this session. And if you didn't, what resonated with you as something that affirmed your practices as an urban educator? It gave you a way to go. I'm already on this. I'm already on top of it. I am already doing the right thing. But if you learn something new, or whether it was affirming, the other part of that reflection is, how are you going to use this knowledge to accelerate student learning? Because as an African American who was born and raised in the Russell and California neighborhoods in the West End of Louisville, Kentucky, who's been African American my whole life, and am raising 2 African American children, I am still in a different space and time, given where we are as a nation, as a state, and as a city right now. So there's still some things that I would do differently in my practice to accelerate student learning. So in that reflection, please be as thoughtful as you can. I am Sandra Hogue. I am AIS ELA Instructional Lead. My Twitter handle is @SandraLHogue. And so if you would like to share any amazing text that you discover, any ahas from those blog posts or from the anti-racist handbook, anything that you find that you think would help me to help others, please tag me in a post on Twitter or email me directly. I'm accessible on the global. I thank you for being with me today, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your learning in AIS week. Blessings to all.